sir.
Stop right there. Don't move.
I'm not resisting. Why am I being stopped?
Because I said so. Hands where I can see.
I've done nothing wrong. Am I being detained or am I free to go?
Don't argue with me. You're getting real suspicious right now.
Suspicious isn't a crime, officer. This is profiling, and it's on camera.
The security camera footage stamped with the date October 14th, 2024, and the time 7:15 a.m. would eventually become the centerpiece of a federal civil rights lawsuit that dominated national headlines for months. But at that specific moment, amidst the hum of the bustling terminal at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, it was just another morning. A woman of distinct elegance walked through the polished concourse of Terminal 3. This was Elena Rodriguez, a 52-year-old woman of Puerto Rican descent, who carried herself with an air of authority that usually cleared a path in crowded rooms. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray power suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and wore a simple string of pearls. Her luggage, a sleek leather carry-on, glided silently behind her. Elena was not merely a passenger. She was a pillar of the legal community, though the badge she carried was tucked away deep in her purse. Officer Mark Henderson, a 34-year-old security enforcement officer with a buzz cut and a posture that screamed aggression, spotted her from his station near the entrance to the H-gates. His eyes narrowed. To him, she didn't look like a distinguished jurist. She looked like a target. Henderson adjusted his belt, hitched up his pants, and stepped into her path with a swagger that betrayed his intentions. He had no idea that he was about to collide with a force of nature that would dismantle his life, his career, and the corrupt culture that had emboldened him. Before diving into the intricate details of this confrontation, it is worth pausing to reflect on the nature of authority. We often assume that a uniform confers legitimacy, but as this story will reveal, true power lies in knowledge, integrity, and the courage to stand firm when rights are threatened. Elena Rodriguez had served as a federal circuit court judge for 9 years. Prior to her appointment to the bench, she had spent 15 years as a ruthless defense attorney protecting the innocent from overzealous prosecution, and another 5 years as a constitutional law professor at a top-tier university. She did not just know the law, she breathed it. She understood the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures better than the architects of the airport security protocols. On this particular Wednesday, she was en route to Washington, D.C. to deliver a keynote address on procedural justice at a national symposium. The irony that she was about to become a victim of procedural injustice was a twist of fate that no one could have scripted. Officer Henderson stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path near the entrance to the gate area. He did not offer a greeting. He did not smile. He simply held up a hand, palm out, stopping her cold. "Hold it right there," Henderson said, his voice loud enough to cause heads to turn nearby. "I need to check your bag. Step over to the side." Elena stopped immediately. She did not flinch, nor did she look frightened. She looked at him with a calm, analytical gaze, the same gaze she used to dissect poorly constructed arguments in her courtroom. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady and modulated. Henderson didn't answer the question. It was a power move, one he had used 100 times before to destabilize passengers. "Where are you flying to today?" he demanded, ignoring her inquiry. "I am traveling to Washington, D.C., just like many other people in this terminal," Elena replied politely. "May I ask why I have been stopped? I have already cleared the primary security checkpoint with no issues." "Let me see your ticket," Henderson snapped, extending a hand. Elena retrieved her smartphone from her pocket, unlocking it and displaying the QR code of her digital boarding pass. Henderson barely glanced at the flight details. His eyes were scanning her, looking for a crack in her composure. Finding none seemed to irritate him. "ID!" he barked. Elena reached into her purse. Her movements were deliberate and slow, designed to show she was not a threat, but also to give her time to assess the situation. She handed him her driver's license. Henderson took it and held it up to the light, staring at it for an uncomfortable amount of time. He looked from the photo to her face and back again, frowning as if trying to find a discrepancy. "You coming from home?" he asked. "Yes," Elena said. "Where's home?" "I live in Lincoln Park," she answered. She was beginning to catalog every violation, every deviation from standard protocol. She noticed that while Henderson was grilling her, dozens of other passengers were streaming past them. A group of young white men in loud sports jerseys carrying bulging duffel bags walked right by, laughing and shoving each other. Henderson didn't even blink. An elderly woman struggling with 3 shopping bags shuffled past. He offered no assistance and no scrutiny. A businessman in a disheveled suit, looking sweaty and nervous, hurried by, clutching a briefcase. Henderson ignored him completely. Elena was being singled out. It was profiling, pure and simple. "What do you do for work, Ms. Rodriguez?" Henderson asked, dropping the formality of her title, his tone bordering on condescending. Elena knew that, under the current circumstances, he had no legal basis to demand her employment history for a simple security check unless he had reasonable suspicion of a crime. However, she chose to answer, curious to see how deep a hole he would dig. "I work in the legal system," she said neutrally. "Legal system?" Henderson scoffed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "What, like a paralegal secretary?" "I work in federal criminal law," she clarified, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her full title just yet. "Right," Henderson said, his skepticism dripping from the word. "Well, Ms. Criminal Law, I'm going to need you to step over to that stainless steel table. We're doing a secondary search of your luggage." Elena knew that random searches were a reality of air travel. But nothing about this interaction was random. The targeted questioning, the dismissal of other passengers, and his aggressive demeanor all pointed to bias. Still, she had nothing to hide. Compliance, she knew, was the best way to secure evidence of his misconduct without giving him grounds to claim she was resisting. She walked over to the metal table. Henderson followed, too close, invading her personal space. He zipped open her suitcase with a violent motion. "Open it all the way," he ordered. He didn't wait for her to assist. He began pulling her belongings out. This was not a careful search for contraband. It was a performance of dominance. He took out her folded blazers and shook them out, letting them pile up in a heap. He pulled out her undergarments, lace, and silk private items and laid them out across the cold metal table for the passing public to see. Elena felt a flash of heat rise in her neck, a natural human reaction to humiliation, but she clamped down on it with years of judicial discipline. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, observing. Travelers walking by slowed down to watch. The spectacle of a uniformed officer rifling through a woman's intimate belongings was designed to shame. Some onlookers looked sympathetic, whispering to each other. Others averted their gaze, embarrassed for her. A few stopped to watch with morbid curiosity. Henderson wasn't done. He unzipped her toiletry kit. He opened a bottle of expensive moisturizer and stuck his finger in it, swirling it around before wiping the excess on a tissue, effectively ruining the product. He squeezed her tube of toothpaste. He opened her prescription bottle, shaking the pills in his hand before dumping them back in. "Lot of pills," he muttered. "That is a standard prescription for blood pressure," Elena said coldly. "Is there something specific you are looking for, officer?" "I'll ask the questions," Henderson shot back. Finding nothing illegal in her suitcase, no weapons, no drugs, no large sums of cash. Henderson seemed to grow frustrated. He had expected to find something, anything, to justify his bias. The lack of evidence only made him more determined to assert his control. "Give me the purse," he commanded. Elena handed over her leather handbag. Henderson upended it, dumping the contents onto the table next to her scattered clothes. Her wallet, keys, phone charger, mints, a paperback novel, and a thick leather-bound notebook tumbled out. Henderson reached for the notebook. "Officer," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming sharper. "That notebook contains privileged legal notes regarding active federal cases. You do not have the right to read its contents." Henderson ignored her. He opened the cover. "I can check anything I want for security purposes," he claimed falsely. "That is incorrect," Elena stated. "Unless you have a warrant or probable cause to believe the notebook itself contains a weapon or contraband, you cannot read privileged attorney-client or judicial work product. I am instructing you to close that book." Henderson looked at her, his eyes cold. He deliberately turned the page, scanning the handwritten notes. Elena reached into her pocket, retrieved her phone, and tapped the camera icon. She hit record and held the phone up, framing Henderson and her scattered belongings in the shot. "Officer," she said, speaking clearly for the recording, "I am recording this interaction. You are currently reading privileged legal documents against my verbal objection. You have searched my luggage and found no contraband. You are now conducting a warrantless search of confidential materials." Henderson's head snapped up. The sight of the phone enraged him. "Put that phone away," he ordered, stepping toward her. "I have a First Amendment right to record a public official performing their duties in a public space," Elena recited. "I will not put the phone away." "I said put it down," Henderson shouted, closing the distance between them. He was now inches from her face. "You're interfering with a security operation." "I am standing still," Elena countered calmly, though her heart was pounding. "I am not interfering. I am documenting." At that moment, Henderson's partner, Officer Jessica Reynolds, walked over from the adjacent lane. Reynolds was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, and looked visibly uncomfortable. "Mark," Reynolds said tentatively, "what's going on?" "Suspect is being non-compliant." Henderson spat, not taking his eyes off Elena. "Refusing orders." Reynolds looked at the table. She saw the clothes, the undergarments, the scattered toiletries. She saw Elena, a middle-aged woman in a suit holding a phone with a steady hand. She looked at the crowd gathering. "Mark," Reynolds said quietly, "she's clean, right? You checked the bags. Maybe we should just let her pack up." "She's acting suspicious," Henderson insisted. "She's challenging authority." Elena shifted her focus to the new officer. "Officer," she said, panning the camera to Reynolds, "I am being racially profiled and harassed by your partner. I have complied with every lawful order. I have shown ID. I have submitted to a search. No contraband was found. Now I am requesting Officer Henderson's badge number and a supervisor immediately." Henderson had had enough. "You want a supervisor, you can talk to one in the holding cell." He reached out and grabbed Elena's upper arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of her suit. That was the mistake that would end him. "I do not consent to being touched," Elena declared, her voice ringing out through the terminal. "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained," Henderson growled, trying to pull her away from the table. "On what charge?" Elena demanded, planting her feet. "What is the articulable, reasonable suspicion that I have committed a crime?" Henderson faltered. He didn't have one. "Disorderly conduct," he improvised. "Advocating for one's civil rights is not disorderly conduct," Elena said. Officer Reynolds stepped in, placing a hand on Henderson's arm. "Mark, let go. Let go. I'm calling Sergeant Miller." Henderson released her, but he stood looming over her, breathing heavily. The crowd had grown significantly. People were holding up their own phones, recording the scene from multiple angles. The court of public opinion was already in session. Elena did not cower. She kept her camera trained on Henderson's face. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Miller, a weary-looking man in his 50s with graying hair, arrived on the scene. By then, Elena had missed her flight. The gate had closed. Miller assessed the situation. He saw the scattered belongings. He saw the furious but composed woman. He saw his subordinate Henderson looking defiant but slightly panicked. "What seems to be the problem?" Miller asked. Elena spoke before Henderson could lie. "Sergeant, I am filing a formal complaint against Officer Henderson for racial profiling, unlawful detention, excessive force, and violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. He has destroyed personal property." She pointed to the moisturizer and attempted to read privileged legal documents. Miller looked at Henderson. "Is this true?" "She was giving me attitude, Sarge. She wouldn't put the phone away." Miller turned back to Elena. "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. We can get you rebooked on the next flight. Why don't you pack your things up and we can forget about this?" Elena smiled, but it was a terrifying expression. "Sergeant, we will absolutely not forget about this. I want your name, your badge number, his name, his badge number, and the incident report number. I also want the contact information for your internal affairs division." Miller sighed. "Look, lady, he was just doing his job. Let's not make a federal case out of it." "It is already a federal case," Elena said. "You just don't realize it yet. And for the record, I am a federal circuit court judge. I suggest you start writing things down." The color drained from Sergeant Miller's face. He looked at Henderson, whose eyes had gone wide with sudden dawning horror. Elena spent the next 2 hours in the airport, not in a holding cell, but in the administrative office, documenting everything. She collected the names and phone numbers of 12 witnesses who had stayed behind to support her. She uploaded her video to 3 different cloud servers. She wrote a detailed affidavit while her memory was fresh timestamping every event. She eventually made it to Washington, D.C. late that night. She delivered her speech the next morning. She tossed her prepared remarks aside and spoke extemporaneously about the rot within the enforcement systems of the country. She used her own experience, less than 24 hours old, as the primary example. The room of lawyers, judges, and policymakers sat in stunned silence. When she finished, the ovation was thunderous. Upon returning to Chicago, Elena Rodriguez did not rest. She filed a formal complaint with the Department of Aviation Security and the local police oversight board. 3 weeks later, she received a letter. It was a standard rejection. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, we have investigated your complaint regarding the incident on October 14th. We have determined that the officer acted within department policy regarding random security screenings. No disciplinary action will be taken. We consider this matter closed. Elena read the letter in her chambers, the morning light filtering through the heavy blinds. She set the letter down on her mahogany desk. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Marcus, she said when the line connected. Marcus Thorne was a civil rights litigator known for being a shark in the courtroom. It's Elena. They denied it. They're protecting him. File the suit. The press conference took place 3 days later on the steps of the federal courthouse. Elena did not wear her judicial robes. She stood as a private citizen, but her presence was commanding. Marcus Thorne stood beside her. They released the video footage. The video went viral within hours. Millions of views. The image of Henderson sneering, dumping her underwear on the table, and grabbing the arm of a federal judge sparked outrage across the political spectrum. It was undeniable proof of bullying and bias. The lawsuit named Officer Mark Henderson, Officer Jessica Reynolds for failure to intervene, Sergeant Miller for supervisory negligence, and the Department of Aviation Security. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, assault battery, and false imprisonment. During the discovery phase, Marcus Thorne and his team ripped the department apart. They subpoenaed Henderson's personnel file. It was a goldmine of negligence. Henderson had 11 prior complaints lodged against him in 5 years. Every single complainant was a person of color, Black, Latino, Middle Eastern. The complaints ranged from verbal abuse to illegal searches. In one case, he had detained a Black neurosurgeon for 45 minutes, causing him to miss a transplant surgery briefing. In another, he had humiliated a Sikh man by demanding he remove his turban in public against all protocols. Every single one of those complaints had been dismissed by leadership with a generic "officer acted within policy" letter. Elena's team hired a statistician. They analyzed 2 years of Henderson's stop and search logs. The data was damning. Henderson selected non-white passengers for random screenings 85% of the time, despite non-white passengers making up only 30% of the traveler demographic. Furthermore, his hit rate, the rate at which he actually found contraband, was statistically 0. He wasn't catching criminals, he was harassing minorities. The trial began 14 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed. Elena took the stand. She remained calm, precise, and devastatingly articulate. She described the fear she felt when he grabbed her, the humiliation of the search, and the realization that her status as a judge offered her no protection in that moment, which meant ordinary citizens had even less. If this can happen to someone who knows the law as intimately as I do, Elena testified, looking directly at the jury, then what chance does a 19-year-old student have? What chance does a grandmother with a language barrier have? This was not security. This was an exercise in domination. Officer Henderson took the stand in his own defense. He was a disaster. Under Marcus Thorne's cross-examination, he crumbled. He couldn't explain why he stopped Elena. He couldn't explain the statistics. He tried to claim he was following his gut, to which Thorne replied, "Officer, your gut seems to have a racial bias that implies a violation of federal law." Officer Reynolds testified for the plaintiff. She admitted she knew what Henderson was doing was wrong. She wept on the stand, admitting she was afraid to speak up against a senior officer because of the department's culture of retaliation. "I should have stopped him," she whispered. "I'm sorry." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They returned a verdict that sent shockwaves through the legal community. They found in favor of Elena Rodriguez on all counts. They awarded $250,000 in compensatory damages. But it was the punitive damages that made history. The jury awarded $6.2 million in punitive damages against the department and the officers. They wanted to send a message that could not be ignored by the accountants in City Hall. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the defendants. Officer Mark Henderson was fired immediately following the verdict. But it didn't end there. Because the jury found he had willfully violated civil rights, he was stripped of his qualified immunity. He faced personal liability. He lost his pension. He was decertified by the state police board, meaning he could never hold a job in law enforcement or private security again. At 35, he was unemployable, publicly disgraced, and buried in debt. His name became a cautionary tale in police academies across the country. Sergeant Miller was forced into early retirement, his reputation in tatters. Officer Reynolds was suspended for 6 months and required to undergo intensive retraining. She eventually transferred to a different department, determined to be a better officer. The Department of Aviation Security was placed under a federal consent decree. An independent monitor was appointed to oversee all stop and search procedures for the next 10 years. Every stop now required a written justification, and body cameras were made mandatory for all security personnel with strict penalties for turning them off. But Elena Rodriguez wasn't done. She took the entire $6.45 million settlement, every penny, and established the Rodriguez Justice Initiative. It was a non-profit legal fund dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation to victims of racial profiling and police misconduct at transportation hubs. Within the first 2 years, the initiative filed 40 lawsuits. They won 35 of them. They forced policy changes at airports in Los Angeles, New York, and Atlanta. They created a mobile app that allowed travelers to instantly report profiling and upload video directly to the initiative's servers. 5 years later, Elena Rodriguez was nominated to the Supreme Court of Illinois. During her confirmation hearings, the airport incident was brought up. "Judge Rodriguez," a senator asked, "do you believe your experience with Officer Henderson has compromised your impartiality toward law enforcement?" Elena adjusted the microphone and looked the senator in the eye. "Senator, impartiality does not mean blindness to reality. My experience taught me that the law is only as good as the people enforcing it. It taught me that justice is not a passive state. It is an active pursuit. I do not hate law enforcement. I respect the badge too much to allow it to be tarnished by bigotry. My experience has made me a better judge because I now understand on a visceral level the difference between the letter of the law and the application of it." She was confirmed unanimously. Back at Chicago O'Hare, things had changed. The culture of the security teams had shifted. It wasn't perfect, but the fear of being the next Henderson kept officers in check. The stats on racial profiling dropped significantly. One afternoon, Justice Elena Rodriguez walked through the same terminal where she had been stopped years earlier. She was heading to a conference. As she passed the security checkpoint, a young black officer spotted her. He didn't stop her. He didn't harass her. He stood up straighter. He nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon, Justice Rodriguez," he said. Elena paused. She looked at the young man, seeing the professionalism she had fought to instill in the system. She smiled a genuine, warm smile. "Good afternoon, officer. Stay safe out there." She walked to her gate, pulling her bag behind her. The sound of the wheels, a quiet rhythm on the floor. She had won the battle, but she knew the war for justice was eternal, and she was ready for whatever came next. The lesson. The story of Justice Elena Rodriguez and Officer Henderson teaches us a profound lesson about the cost of silence and the power of documentation. For years, Officer Henderson operated with impunity because his victims, often vulnerable or simply eager to get on with their lives, stayed silent, or because the system was designed to ignore their complaints. It was only when someone possessed the courage to document the injustice in real time the resources to fight the bureaucratic stonewalling, and the determination to prioritize principle over convenience that the system was forced to correct itself. However, the most critical takeaway is for the bystanders. Officer Reynolds and the initial witnesses saw something wrong and hesitated. Justice was only served because Elena advocated for herself and eventually rallied a legal force. We must learn that when we witness injustice, passivity is a form of complicity. Whether it is recording an incident offering contact information as a witness or simply speaking up when power is being abused, our collective vigilance is the only thing that protects our civil liberties. Rights are like muscles. If we do not exercise them and defend them, they atrophy. Never assume someone else will handle it. In that moment, you are the guardian of justice.